Nobody had saved the old man a seat, and I was the only one in that whole bright room who seemed to notice it. I saw it from the side of the stage, tuning, with my cello between my knees and my bow gone still in my hand. The conquered hall of the House of Marbledown was full of light and famous faces, and in the middle of all of it stood the man the evening was supposed to honor, holding his program with both hands like a boy lost at a fair, while a girl in a silver dress laughed past him and took the chair that had his name card on it. I should tell you who he was, because I am ashamed now of how few in that room could have told you themselves. His name was Aldous Wren, and he had written more of the music of this kingdom than any living soul. The anthem they play when the king takes the field, his. The slow movement the whole country wept through the winter the harbor froze, and 300 men did not come home, his. He was 81 years old that night, and his hands shook so that he had not been able to hold a pen for 2 years, and they had brought him to the conquered hall to give him the Marbledown laurel, the highest honor this kingdom has for a maker of beautiful things, and not one of the bright young people drinking under the chandeliers knew what he looked like. I knew. I was 23, third cello in the Gala orchestra, hired for the night with 40 other young players to make the room sound expensive. But I had grown up on Aldous Wren. My grandfather, who taught me the instrument in a cold front room with a coal stove that smoked, used to put my small hands on the strings and say, "Play it like Wren wrote it, like it costs you something." I had come to the Concord Hall that night half to earn my fee and half on the chance that I might see the man whose music had built me. And there he was, and nobody had saved him a seat. You should know what the room was. The Concord Hall is the great gala room of the kingdom, the one they open for the things that matter, the place where the realm tells itself what it loves. That night it had filled with the people the kingdom photographs, actors from the new serials, a singer or two with their hair done expensive, the kind of young men who are famous for being young and famous, all of them moving in a loose bright current under the chandeliers with glasses in their hands, and their faces always half turned to see who was watching. They were not cruel people, most of them. That is the thing I have had to make my peace with over 30 years. They were not villains. They simply did not look down. The evening had a name on the program, a tribute to Aldous Wren, and not one of them had thought to ask what the man it was named for might look like. And so they walked past him the way you walk past a coat rack, the way you walk past anything that is not lit up and looking back at you. I had seen one photograph of Wren in my life, a small gray thing on the back of my grandfather's score of the Caro Elegy, a young man in a stiff collar with serious eyes. The man by the head table was 60 years past that photograph, smaller than I had imagined, with white hair combed flat and a tremor in him that the good dark coat could not hide. But I knew him the way you know a voice on the telephone you have not heard in years. I knew him before he had taken 3 steps into the room. And it shook me, honestly, that I, a hired boy at the back of the strings, should be the one to know him, when the whole shining front of the room did not. I leaned to the player beside me, a violist named Halden, older than I, a steady man who had played these rooms for years, and I said low under the tuning, "Do you know who that is? By the head table, that's Wren." And Halden looked, and his face changed, and he set his bow across his knees and looked at the old man the way I was looking at him, and he said only, "God." "So it is." And then, after a moment, "Nobody's with him." We both watched the old man stand alone at the edge of his own evening, and neither of us could go to him, because the conductor had us tuned and waiting, and a hired player does not leave the stage, and I felt the particular shame of the small and powerless, who see a wrong and have no standing to right it. I think half the reason I have never forgotten that night is that I started it as one of those, a watcher who could not act, and watched a man find a way to act without leaving his post, and learned from him that there is almost always a way, if you care enough to look for it. There was a guard at the foot of the stage. I want to be careful how I tell you about him, because everything that matters in this story is in how still he was, and stillness is a hard thing to put into words without making it sound like nothing was happening. A great deal was happening. He was a king's guard of the inner watch, posted at the corner of the dais where the laurel would be given, in the red tunic and the tall black bearskin, white gloves on the rifle, medals catching the chandelier, eyes forward and level over all our heads. He did not look at the old man. He did not look at the girl in the silver dress. He looked, as a man of that watch is trained to look, at nothing and at everything the whole bright room held in the flat of his attention. I thought, the way a young man thinks who does not yet understand what he is seeing, that he was the least alive thing in the room. I was wrong about that, the way I was wrong about most things at 23, and the rest of the night taught me so. The trouble had started before I noticed it, the way trouble does. The Concord Hall holds 200 at the long tables under the chandeliers, and the seating had been arranged by a young woman from the sponsor's office with a clipboard and a bright, hard voice, and somewhere in the arranging the man being honored had been folded to the edge of it. His card was at the head table, second from the king's empty chair. The king was to arrive at 9 to give the laurel himself. But the head table had filled with the people who fill head tables, the ones who arrive late and certain, and a knot of them had drifted the cards around to sit beside their friends, and Aldous Wren's card had ended up tucked behind a centerpiece of white roses where no one could read it, and the chair beneath it had been taken. So the old man stood. He stood at the end of the head table in his good dark coat that was 20 years out of fashion and brushed very carefully, holding his program, and he looked for somewhere to be. A waiter went past him with a tray and did not see him. A famous young actor I will not name, because he is not worth the ink, stepped backward into him laughing at his own joke and said, "Careful, Grandad," without turning around, and 3 people at that table laughed. And the old man said, "I beg your pardon," to the back of the actor's head, very softly, as though the fault had been his. I felt my face go hot. I looked at the guard. The guard had not moved, but I will tell you what I noticed because I have thought about it 10,000 times since. When the actor said "Grandad" and the table laughed, the guard's eyes came down. Just for a moment. Just a flick, the way a still pond shows you a fish only by the smallest dimple on the surface, and then the surface closed again, and his eyes were level and forward, and he was a statue once more. He had heard it. He had seen the old man say, "I beg your pardon," to no one, and he had filed it somewhere behind that flat soldier's face, and gone on standing his post. A woman from the sponsor's office, the one with the clipboard, whose name I learned later was Miss Pell, came hurrying across the floor in heels that were losing the war with the marble, and she reached the old man and put on the smile they teach you to put on. "Mr. Wren, there you are. We're so thrilled. If you'll just—" and she looked at the head table, and the head table looked back at her with the polite blankness of people who have decided the problem is not theirs, and her smile flickered, and she said, "If you'll just give us one moment, we'll get you settled." And she steered him by the elbow to the side wall near where I sat tuning, and she stood him against it like a coat, and she went away to find someone, and she did not come back. He stood against the wall. I cannot tell you how long. It was long enough that the laughter at the tables rose and fell twice. It was long enough that a server offered him a glass of wine, and he said no thank you with a small bow of the head, and a woman in green who had been a singer once, you could tell from the way she held her chin, looked at him standing there alone and leaned to her neighbor and said something behind her hand, and they both glanced at him and looked away. It was long enough that his hand, the one holding the program, began to tremble harder, the way a tired old hand will, and he pressed the program flat against his chest with both hands to still it, and he kept his eyes on the chandelier so that no one would see that they had gone wet. 81 years old, the most music in the kingdom, standing against a wall like a man waiting to be told he could go home. A young couple drifted near him, holding their glasses, and the woman glanced at the program in the old man's hands and then at his face, and I saw the question form in her, "Do I know him?" And then I saw her decide that she did not, because he was not lit up, because he was old and small and pressed to a wall, and she turned her shoulder and went on. And the worst of it, the thing that put a stone in my chest was that Aldous Wren had seen her decide it. He had watched her almost remember him and then choose to forget, and he had given her the smallest courteous nod as she turned away, forgiving her for it, the way a man forgives the rain. He was not angry. That is what undid me. A lesser man would have been angry, and anger at least is a kind of standing up. He only stood there and was gentle about being unseen, and somehow that was 1,000 times worse to watch. I have wondered since whether he was used to it, whether the last years of a great life are mostly this, the slow going out of the light of being known, the world filling up with young bright people who have never heard your name, the long polite business of being forgotten while you are still alive to feel it. I think they may be. I think that is the cruelty no one warns the makers of beautiful things about. Not that they will be forgotten when they die, but that they will be forgotten while they live, and have to stand at the edge of the very room raised in their honor and watch it happen. I put my bow down. I think I would have gone to him. I had got as far as deciding I did not care about the fee or the conductor's frown, when I saw that I was not the only one who had decided something. The guard had turned his head. It was nothing. You would not have seen it across the room. A man in that bearskin can turn his head perhaps 3 degrees before a sergeant's voice finds him, and this guard turned it perhaps 2, the smallest possible amount, so that the level line of his attention now ran from his post at the dais straight along the side wall to the old man pressed against it with his wet eyes on the lights. And he held there. He did not break his stance. His hand stayed white on the rifle. But the whole front of him, the whole disciplined weight of the man, had quietly come to bear on Aldous Wren, and I understood, in a way I could not have explained, that the guard was now standing his post and standing over the old man both at once, and that he had been doing it since Grandad, and that he was not going to stop. I want you to understand what that costs a man like him. I learned the rules later from the guard's own officer, and they are not soft rules. A king's guard of the inner watch on a ceremonial post does not leave it. He does not speak unless his duty requires it. He does not turn, does not bend, does not interfere in the affairs of the room he guards, not for laughter, not for insult, not for a glass of wine spilled at his very boot. The discipline is the whole point of him. He is the still thing the bright room turns around, the proof that some things in the kingdom do not move for fashion or for money or for fame. To break that, even for a kindness, is to fail at the one thing he is there to be. So he did not leave his post. Remember that, because it is the heart of what he did. He found a way to do the kind thing without failing the hard thing, and that is the most a disciplined man can do, and it is harder than either alone. The first thing he did was so small I nearly missed it. There was a steward near the dais, a young man in the house livery, hovering with a folder, the sort of nervous junior who is sent to fetch and carry on a great night. The guard's eyes went to him, that flat soldier's attention, swinging like a lamp, and stopped on him and held. The steward felt it the way you feel a hand on your shoulder in a crowd. He looked up. He looked at the guard, and the guard's eyes moved once deliberately from the steward to the old man against the wall and back again, and then down to the empty chair that stood folded against the dais, the spare chair they keep there in case the king's party needs one more. He was not allowed to speak, so he had said it all without a word. That one, that empty chair, to that one, that old man now. The steward did not understand at first. He looked at the chair, and at the old man, and back at the guard with his mouth a little open, a boy waiting to be told what the rules were. And the guard did a thing I have never forgotten. He could not nod. A nod is a break of stance, but he closed his eyes slowly and opened them. Once, the way you would say yes to someone across a room full of people you did not want to hear you. Yes, that chair, that man, go. The steward went. He carried the spare chair across that bright floor, and you would not believe how much courage it takes a nervous boy of 19 to carry a chair across a room full of famous people who have decided the evening belongs to them. And twice he had to wait, the chair held awkwardly in front of him, while a knot of laughing guests closed across his path and did not part for him, and I watched him glance back once at the guard, the way a soldier sent forward under fire glances back at the line, to make sure the order still held. The guard had not moved. The guard's eyes were forward and level and gave the boy nothing but the certainty that he had been told to do this thing and must do it. And the boy squared his thin shoulders and went on through, and he set the chair down beside the old man at the side wall, and he said something to him low with his head bent. I was close enough to hear it. He said, "Sir, there's a seat here for you." The guard seen to it. The old man looked at him. Then he looked slowly across all those heads to the guard at the dais, who was not looking at him at all now, eyes forward, a statue again, the whole thing already filed away behind his face as though it had never happened. And the old man understood. I watched him understand. Something went over his face that I have only ever seen on the very old, a kind of grateful trembling, and he lowered himself into the chair the boy held for him with the enormous careful dignity of a man whose body has become a thing he must negotiate with. And he set his program on his knees, and he was sitting down at last, in his own honor, against the wall. It should have ended there. A seat is a small thing, but the room was not finished with him, and neither was the guard. The girl in the silver dress, the one who had taken his chair, came drifting back from the bar with two of her friends, all of them lit up and loud the way the young and certain are, and they stopped in front of the old man in his chair against the wall, and the girl looked down at him with her bright empty kindness and said, "Oh, are you all right down here? You look a bit lost." And one of her friends, a young man with a camera the size of a brick, lifted it and said, "Hold on, this is a moment. Isn't it, old chap at the Gala?" and pointed it at the old man's face, and the little red light came on. I felt the whole room tilt. Aldous Wren put his trembling hand up, not to push the camera away. He had not the strength to be angry, but to cover his face, the way a man does who is ashamed of being seen ashamed. And the young people laughed because it was funny to them, an old man hiding from a phone, and the camera held on him, and I stood up. I will not pretend I was brave. I stood up because something in me could not stay down, and I had got perhaps 2 steps with my heart going like a drum when I saw that I did not need to go. Because the steward, the nervous boy of 19, had not gone back to his folder. He had stayed near the old man's chair, and he stepped now between the camera and Aldous Wren, not roughly, just a body in the way, and he said, "I'm sorry, there's no filming of the guests," in a voice that shook. And the young man with the camera said, "And who are you?" and laughed, and lifted the camera over the boy's shoulder. And the guard moved. I want to be exact about this because afterward people told it wrong, the way people do. The guard did not charge across the room. He did not shout. He did not lay a hand on the young man with the camera. What he did was take one step, to the side, off the corner of the dais and onto the floor, and turn, so that he now stood square between the chandeliers and the old man's chair, his back to the famous tables and his face to Aldous Wren, the rifle at his shoulder, and he came to attention. You have to understand what that does in a room when a king's guard of the inner watch leaves his ceremonial post, which he is forbidden to do, and plants himself in front of one frightened old man and snaps to attention so hard the metals ring. It is louder than any shout. The whole hall heard the heels come together. The whole hall turned. And there was the guard, standing over Aldous Wren like a red wall, eyes forward. And there was the young man with the camera, with his arms still up and the little red light still on, suddenly filming the broad, immovable back of a soldier of the king and nothing else at all. The camera came down, slowly. The young man's bright face had gone uncertain in a way I do not think it had ever been before in his charmed life. The girl in the silver dress had stopped smiling, and the steward, the brave, shaking boy, looked up at the back of the guard who had appeared at his shoulder and went, I think, very near to tears with relief. The guard said nothing. He did not have to. He stood there square in front of the old composer, and the meaning of him filled the room. This man is under the protection of the king's watch, and you will not touch him, and you will not mock him, and you will not point your toys at his shame. He had broken his post. He had broken the one rule that defined him. And he had done it not to strike a man but to stand in front of one. And that, I knew it even then, at 23, with my heart in my throat, that was the most disciplined thing I had ever seen a man do. Then the officer came. I saw him come in from the side door, a captain of the watch in the dark dress uniform, drawn by the heels in the turning room, and my stomach dropped, because I thought, now he is for it. Now the guard who left his post will be marched out and reprimanded, and the kindness will cost him everything. The captain crossed the floor fast and quiet. He came up to the guard standing over the old man, and he stopped, and he took it all in, the steward, the camera coming down, the famous young people frozen and uncertain, and the old man in the chair with his hand still half over his face. And the captain did not order the guard back to his post. He looked at the old man for a long moment. Then he looked at the guard, and I was near enough to hear it, and he said, very low, "Who is he, Bryce?" So the guard had a name, Bryce, and Bryce answered his captain because his duty now required it in a voice I had not heard, a quiet, flat soldier's voice with something underneath it like banked coal. He said, "He's Aldous Wren, sir. He wrote the Caro elegy." He paused. "My father came home under that music, sir. What was left of him, they played it over the box." The captain stood very still. I do not think he had known either before that moment, who the small, trembling old man at the wall was. But he knew the Caro elegy. Every man in that uniform knew the Caro elegy. It is the slow movement the country wept through the winter the harbor froze, the music they play when the men who did not come home are carried past. The captain looked at Aldous Wren the way you look at a thing you have leaned on all your life, without knowing its name. Then he straightened, and he did something that undid the last of the bright certain people in that room. He turned to face the long head table, the actors, the singers, the girl in silver, the young man with the dead camera in his hand, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not scold. He simply said into the silence they had all made, "This is Aldous Wren. He wrote the music you stand for at the gate and the music they bury your brothers to. The king is coming in 20 minutes to put the marble-down laurel around his neck. Until then he is the guest of the king's watch." And he turned back to the old man, and he came to attention, and he saluted him, a captain of the watch, saluting a trembling old man in a chair against the wall, and he held it. I have been in rooms when something true happens and everyone in them knows it at once. This was that. The salute hung in the air, and then the steward, the brave boy, came to attention beside his captain and saluted too, clumsily, with his whole heart. And then, I will remember this until I die, an old waiter by the service door, a man of 70 with a tray still in his hand, set the tray down on a stand and came to attention and saluted, because he, of his whole generation, knew exactly who was sitting against that wall. And then a gray-haired man at the second table, who I learned afterward had played first violin under Wren's baton 40 years before, and had come tonight in hope of shaking his hand, stood up from among the famous people, and saluted with tears running openly down his face. The young people did not salute. They did not know how, but the girl in the silver dress had begun, very quietly, to cry, and the young man had put his camera away in his pocket as though it had burned him, and the famous actor who had said, "Careful, Grandad," had gone the color of paper and was looking at his own shoes. They had come to the conquered hall to be seen, and they had been seen, and it was not the way they had wanted. I want to be fair to them, because 30 years have taught me that fairness is the only thing worth the trouble of remembering well. The actor, the one who had said "Grandad" to the back of his own joke, came across the floor, after the salute had passed and the room had begun to breathe again, and he stood in front of Aldous Wren's chair, and you could see it cost him something to do it, because the whole room was watching him now the way it had not watched the old man, and watching is the thing his sort lives and dies by. He bent down. I did not hear all of what he said, but I heard the shape of it, and it was not a performance. He said he was sorry. He said he had not known. He said his mother had a record. I caught that. His mother had a record, and that she played one piece of it every year on a certain day, and that he had grown up with it without ever once asking whose it was. And Aldous Wren reached up with his trembling hand and patted the young man's arm twice, and said something back that made the actor put his hand over his own mouth and straighten up fast and walk away toward the doors with his head down. I have always hoped it was a kind thing. Knowing what I came to know of the old man, I am sure it was. He forgave that one too, the way he forgave the rain. Through all of it the guard, Bryce, stood square in front of the old man and did not move, and did not salute, because his post now was to be the wall between Aldous Wren and the room, and he kept it. What happened over the next 20 minutes was the room putting itself right, and it was the steward and the captain who drove it, but it had started with the guard, and everyone in that hall knew it. Miss Pell came back, white-faced now and moving differently, all the bright hard cheer gone out of her and something better in its place. She did not stand the old man against a wall this time. She knelt by his chair, knelt in her good dress on the marble, and she said she was sorry, and she meant it, and she asked him where he would like to sit, and Aldous Wren said, with the courtesy of a man who had been raised in a harder and gentler age, that he did not wish to be any trouble. And the captain said it was no trouble at all, sir, and he and the steward took the old man's chair up between them, with the old man in it, the way you would carry a king on a litter, and they did not put him back at the corner of the head table behind the roses. They carried him to the center of it, to the place beside the king's empty chair, where his name card had been all along, under the centerpiece, where no one had looked. And they cleared it. The girl in the silver dress got up from the seat she had taken without being asked, and moved away to the end of the table with her eyes down, and the famous actor moved without being asked, and a space opened at the very heart of that bright room, and they set Aldous Wren down in it, in his own honor, in the chair that had always been his, and they put his name card up where the candlelight could find it. And the gray-haired violinist who had played under him 40 years before asked, very humbly, if he might sit beside him, and the old man's face, when he understood who the violinist was, when two old men who had made beautiful things together half a lifetime ago found each other across all that noise. The old man's face is the thing I will keep from that night when I have forgotten everything else. The king came in at 9. He was told in the doorway what had happened. I saw the captain bend and tell him, lo, and the king crossed the whole length of the conquered hall without stopping to greet a single famous person, and he stopped in front of Aldous Wren, and he did not give a speech. He took the old man's trembling hands in both of his and held them until they were still. Then he put the marble-down laurel around his neck himself, and he turned the old man's chair, gently, with his own hand on the back of it, so that it faced the room, so that the man the whole evening was for could be seen. And then the king looked across the hall to the corner of the dais where Bryce had returned, in the quiet of the room putting itself right to his post, back in his place, eyes forward, a statue once more, the medal still and the white gloves on the rifle, exactly as though he had never moved at all. The king looked at him for a moment. Bryce did not look back. A man of that watch does not. But the king inclined his head to him, the smallest bow, the kind a king gives only to a man who has done the thing the king himself could not have done faster or better. And then he let his guardsman be, and turned to the room, and asked us to play. We played the Caro elegy. The conductor had not planned it. We had a program of bright, cheerful pieces meant to keep the famous people happy between courses. But the gray-haired violinist had gone to him quietly and whispered, and the conductor had looked out at the old man in the center of the room and laid the program aside, and he turned to us and said, just to us, from the top of the elegy, for him, and he lifted his hands. I have played the Caro elegy perhaps 200 times in my life, in good halls and bad, for money and for love. I had never played it for the man who wrote it. The first low notes of it are carried by the cellos, by us, by me, a slow descending phrase like a tide going out, and I have always been told to play it plainly. No weeping, no showing off, just the true shape of the grief, because the grief is in the notes and a player who adds his own only gets in the way. I played it as plainly as I knew how, and I felt my grandfather's hands over mine the whole time, in the cold front room with the coal stove that smoked, telling me to play it like it costs you something. It cost me something. It cost the whole room something. And I watched the old man while I played because I could not stop myself, and I saw him do a thing I will carry to my own grave. As the music went on, as his own grief came back to him across 60 years, the slow movement he had written the winter the harbor froze and 300 men did not come home. Aldous Wren lifted his trembling right hand from the arm of his chair, and he began, very slightly, to conduct. Not for us. We could barely see it. For himself. The old shaking hand rose and fell in the time he had set down on paper before any of us were born, shaping the music in the air the way he must have shaped it 10,000 times across his long life, and the tremor that had taken his pen from him 2 years before went still inside the beat, because the beat was older in him than the trembling was. He could not hold a pen, but he could still hold the time of his own elegy. By the end there was not a dry face at the famous tables, and the girl in the silver dress was weeping with her hand over her mouth, and the old man sat with his eyes closed and his hand finally come to rest, listening to himself across the years, honored at last. When it was over, he did not stand to take the applause because he could not, so the room stood for him. Every soul in the conquered hall rose to their feet, the famous and the forgotten alike, and they did not clap so much as simply stand, the way you stand when the dead go past, and the old man bowed his head to us from his chair. I went to find the guard afterward. I do not know why. I think I needed to say something to him, though I had no idea what. They were changing the watch by then, the relief come up in the quiet after the music, and I stood at the edge of the room and watched it. The two men facing each other, the stamp and the turn. The rifle passed from the old post to the new with a precision that had nothing to do with the Gala and everything to do with 300 years of doing it exactly so. Bryce went through it without a flicker, the way he had gone through everything that night, and when it was done and he was relieved, he marched off toward the side door with his eyes forward and his face giving away nothing at all, and you would never have known to look at him that an hour before he had stepped off his post in front of 200 famous people and made himself a wall for a frightened old man. He had put it away. That is the thing about the best of them. They do the extraordinary thing and then they fold it up small and put it away and go back to being ordinary, because the work is the point and not the doing of it where people can see. I tried to catch him at the door and could not. A man being relieved does not stop for a hired boy with a cello. So I caught his officer instead, the captain, Bryce's captain, who had paused there a moment putting on his gloves, and I asked him, because I was young and did not know you do not ask such things, whether Bryce would be in trouble for leaving his post. The captain looked at me for a moment, taking in the boy with the cello and the wet eyes. Then he said something I have carried for 30 years. He said, "The post isn't the patch of floor, son. The post is the thing we're there to protect." He never left it for a second. He looked back into the hall, at the old man in the center of it with the laurel on his chest and the king's hand on his shoulder. We stand at that dais so that nobody important gets touched. He just understood, quicker than I did, who the important man in that room was. He put his cap on. I'll be putting his name forward, not taking it down. Now go home and remember it. I never learned anything more about Bryce. I do not know if he is living. The watch does not give out the names of its men, and I never saw the captain again, and the steward I lost in the crowd. Aldous Wren died 11 months later in his sleep, with the marble-down laurel on the table beside his bed, and the kingdom played the Caro elegy for him this time. And I was in the orchestra that did it, and I played it like it cost me something, because it did. But I have thought about that guard every day of my life since, and I have come to believe the captain was exactly right, and that it is the truest thing I know about discipline. We think the disciplined man is the one who does not move. He is not. The disciplined man is the one who knows. In the half-second the room laughs at an old man against a wall, precisely what he is standing there to protect, and moves only for that, and for nothing else, and gives up even his own perfect stillness when stillness has become the lesser honor. Bryce gave up the one thing that defined him to put himself in front of a frightened old man, and in doing it, he was more a king's guard than he had ever been at attention. I am an old man myself now, or nearly. I teach the cello to children in a cold front room, and I put their small hands on the strings, and I tell them to play it like Wren wrote it, like it costs them something. And when one of them asks me who Wren was, I tell them about the music. And then, if they are listening, if they are the kind who will be worth teaching, I tell them about the night nobody saved the old master a seat, and about the one still man in that whole bright room who saw it, and who knew that the honor of the king's watch was not the gleam of his medals nor the patch of floor under his boots, but the old man trembling against the wall. He kept that honor. He gave it back to a man the room had taken it from. And then he stood his post again as though nothing had happened, which is the way the best of them always do. That is the whole of it. A seat, a chair, a step off the dais, a salute, small things. But I have lived long enough to know that honor is made of small things kept faithfully, and that the man who keeps them when no one is making him is the rarest and the best of us. Play it like it costs you something. Save the old master a seat. And if you are ever the only one in a bright room who sees a good man being quietly unmade against a wall, be the one who moves.